Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. With a railway stoppage looming, there are growing calls for government intervention. And if no deal is reached before tonight's deadline, what will be the impact on the economy? And if half the population will experience it, why is menopause still such a mystery? Later in our show, we'll have two experts to answer everything you've ever wanted to know. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you for joining us, as always, on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. Should the government intervene to prevent an unprecedented railway stoppage? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call us at 1-800-825-5950 or just hit pound 690. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, in about 9 hours from now, Canada's two national rail lines could be shut down. Talks between the union that represents more than 9,000 rail workers and the two rail lines, CN Rail and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, are down to the wire now. And if there's no deal, workers could be on strike or locked out. Now, that would have serious consequences for commerce and communities across this country. One company sounding the alarm is Chemtrade Logistics. Their North Vancouver facility provides most of the liquid chlorine used in drinking water in Western Canada. Their commercial vice president, Alan Robinson, told CBC's The Early Edition that the supply of chlorine to municipalities is already being disrupted.
We haven't shipped in 10 days. Bleach manufacturers, so our chlorine goes to bleach. Bleach then goes to your municipalities for drinking water. Bleach manufacturers typically keep bleach around for what I'd say 2 to 3 weeks because it begins to break down, especially given the high heat and the summer weather that we're having right now. So we are looking at a value chain that cannot stockpile to have inventories on hand to keep weathering this storm in terms of whether there's a strike or not. So we're urging the government to go ahead and step in now.
And he's not alone. There's increasing political pressure for Ottawa to intervene as tonight's deadline looms. But instead, this morning, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged the sides to reach an agreement for the sake of Canadians and Canadian businesses.
My message is very straightforward. It is in the best interest of both sides to continue doing the hard work at the table to find a negotiated resolution. Millions of Canadians, of workers, of farmers, of businesses right across the country are counting on both sides to do the work and get to a resolution.
That falls short of what many business groups are asking for. In a joint statement, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council of Canada, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Organization called on the federal government to, quote, take, quote, immediate action to keep trains moving. So what do you think? Should the federal government intervene to prevent a railway stoppage? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now is Fraser Johnson. He's the Supply Chain Management Association Chair at the Ivey Business School at Western University. Hello, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, of course. So what are the main issues that are really at stake for the workers?
Well, in any labor negotiation, pay is always front and center. But there are a variety of other issues that the union is worried about. And here we're talking about the Teamsters Union. They represent about 9,300 rail workers between CP Kansas City and CN. And, the other issues include work hours, scheduling for the workers, how they're paid, and eventually, collectively, those items relate to some health and safety considerations that the union has raised, specific worker fatigue.
Now, earlier today, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council of Canada, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters issued a joint statement, and it was calling on the federal government to take immediate action to keep the trains and the goods they carry moving. Yet Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland echoed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in saying that both sides need to come to an agreement. The federal government has already rejected CN's request for binding arbitration. What do you think of the government's stance? Is there any precedence for them to change their position?
Well, the CN petitioned Labor Minister Stephen McKinnon last week to intervene and use binding arbitration, which they can. And the minister refused. And, I understand the logic that a negotiated settlement between two parties independently of a third party arbitrator is probably the best possible outcome. But, I agree with the industry groups that you cited that rail service is an essential industry in the country, and it affects many industries and many Canadians, and we can't afford the labor stoppage to go on too long, if at all.
And we have heard calls to declare the railway service an essential service to prevent these sort of supply chain distributions. Do you think that's something that should seriously be considered?
Well, the government has various legislative remedies, as I understand it, in terms of binding arbitration, bringing back to work legislation. And, if we don't see a settlement this afternoon, I would urge the Canadian government to intervene quickly to put this aside so that it won't interrupt the lives of various Canadian citizens and businesses.
Okay. Fraser, I'm just going to take a call from our audience. Blair in Smithers. Hi, Blair. What are your thoughts on the possible rail stoppage?
Well, good afternoon, Amy. To say that I was a 35-year employee. I retired as senior conductor in assigned service for in Smithers, which meant that I had, at time of retirement, the rare day job. And I'm aware that, it's a tough job with those who are on call.
Absolutely.
And I hear a lot of people talking about back-to-work legislation. And it's not as straightforward as some think or put forward. And they don't realize that there is a process. You can't wave a wand and legislate them back to work. First, you have to table legislation in the Commons. Then there's a vote, which is a non-confidence vote, which means should the government lose, and if it's a minority government, the government will be defeated. And I'd just like to remind everybody that when Stephen Harper was in power, we went on strike, and we were not legislated back for over 3.5 weeks because he wasn't about to lose his government over us. So I hear a lot of oversimplification on the back-to-work legislation. And I think that this strike is a little bit different than some of the others. Strike, lockout, call it what you want, but both CN and CP, long Cs being, Canadian-run companies. And with when I hired on in the late 70s, we were in business for Canada. It was a Crown corporation. CP was considered the wooden axle railway. And with the privatization of both, and then the mergers with CN with Illinois Central and then CP with Kansas City, they're publicly traded companies, and the only allegiance they have is there's no nationalism or Canadian benefit to the public. It's run strictly for the profit of the shareholder, and I think this time around, the companies which are not hurting by any means are making billions of dollars, are looking to squeeze another whatever nickel or dime they can by taking it off the backs of the employees. So I would just like to say that there's more to it than most people think, and I don't really see an immediate resolution. So it could go on longer than some assume.
Okay, and Blair, I really thank you for pointing that out. It is never as simple as we sometimes make it out to be, and perhaps in the media, but certainly there is Fraser, a lot of political nuance as we're seeing various sides try to jockey for positions of power and public favor in the government. Do you think a lot of this back to or sort of federal, especially any stance that they would take, is that going to be quite influenced by how it's perceived by the public and what that might say due to their polling as they head towards an election?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the call. I think there are some great points that were brought up there. And I do agree that when we say that the government should intervene and bring the workers back, that is really an oversimplification because there are a lot of political nuances here. And as a caller reminded us that the Liberals are in a minority government. The leader of the NDP party has come out and said in no uncertain terms that he would not support back to work legislation, that he wants to see the parties work things out. I would, and I understand the notion that, the workers want to make sure that they get a fair contract, and I'm sure the company is entitled to that as well. Part of my concern, however, are the other stakeholders that are affected here. And, there's one group that I'll highlight specifically, and that's the agricultural sector and the farmers.
Yeah.
So we're at the time of year when crops are being harvested in Western Canada, for example, and even I was on a show earlier today in Eastern Canada. And the agricultural supply chain is not designed to store a large amount of crops over a significant period of time. It's designed to process them and move them through the supply chain, whether it's to food processors or for export. So there's a lot of angst in the agricultural sector right now. But what will happen if the rail companies remain on strike, or if they go on strike or lockout?
And that's such an important point to make, especially on the heels of such devastation of incredibly hot summer, incredibly frigid winter. They've lost so much already in terms of crops here in BC, and this obviously couldn't have come at a worse time. We'll take a call from Jord now in Kelowna. Hi, Jord. How are you?
Doing fine.
Thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts on the possible rail stoppage?
I think it should not happen. And if it's the federal government that has the power to stop it, then they should stop it. The problem is that strikes and lockouts were supposed to be an economic play, and they have turned increasingly into a hostage taking of the public. And we have to find a way that does not make the public the hostage of two parties trying or not trying hard enough to negotiate a deal. So from my point of view, all transportation systems, including the rails, including the ports, including the airlines, including passenger airlines, should be an essential service. And within regiments of it being an essential service, the parties can do whatever they have to do to come to an agreement. And I'm not in favor of an imposed agreement, but I am very much in favor of not just running roughshod over the nation and the individuals that are affected by these kinds of job actions. So there needs to be a better balance that protects the public interest and not just the party's interest.
All right, Jord, thank you so much. We'll hear from Jillian now in Port Alberni. Hi, Jillian. What are your thoughts on today's topic?
I was shocked when this story emerged to hear that we no longer have two Canadian national rail carriers. One of them is now Canadian Pacific, Kansas City. And as Mr. Johnson has pointed out, the shareholders are in it strictly for the money, so they have no skin in our economic game.
Right.
So my question is, what impact has U.S. ownership had on labor relations as this situation developed, and how might it impact us going forward, and what remedies might we have against American ownership managing our rail system?
All right. Thank you so much for that, Jillian. Fraser, is this really sort of, playing out that they don't have, as Jillian said, any skin in the game as a Canadian company, that it sort of removes them from that impact that it could have on our country?
No, I would take issue with that. The CP did a couple of years ago take over Kansas City Southern Railroad. But both CN and CP are Canadian companies
Okay.
with their head offices in Canada.
Yep.
Their stocks are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Um, just as a point of note here, for both the last two callers, that in Canada we only have two what they call Class 1 railroads, and this is CN and CP, and they collectively haul about 90% of our freight in Canada, rail freight. And from a revenue standpoint, they haul about $380 billion of freight a year, roughly $1 billion a day. And if you compare that $380 billion to Canada's GDP, which is about $2.1 trillion, it's about 17 or 18% of our total GDP.
And thank you for making that the point, because this often comes to play when we do have sort of a merger between Canadian and American companies. There is that perception of sort of what country they're benefiting and whose side they're on. So yes, CP is still based in Canada, or both railways are still based in Canada. I'm going to get a call now from Jerry in Coburn. Hi, Jerry.
Hi there.
What are your thoughts about the, I guess, looming rail stoppage?
Well, again, like I say, I think this is going to negatively impact our whole country without a doubt.
Yeah, it could.
I mean, every aspect of industry, I mean, everybody basically gets some kind of product or goods via the rail.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you're going to have, I think, if this goes on any length of time, you're going to have massive layoffs in most manufacturing facilities. I think it's definitely negative for our country. And my opinion is the government should legislate them back to work. But mind you, give them a fair wage increase,
mm-hmm.
without a doubt. I'm not saying, hey, just screw the workers and order them back to work. You give them a fair wage increase. And yes, if necessary, order them back to work.
All right, thank you for that. And worth noting, it is wages, but also safety concerns that are very prescient in this disagreement. And Fraser, he sort of mentioned, the longer this goes on, it could be catastrophic for the economy and for the country. And we are hearing from a lot of different businesses, they're already experiencing issues as some shipments were halted sort of proactively ahead of what could occur. What are some of the sort of, I guess, most immediate impacts of a rail stoppage before we get into that worst case scenario long term?
Well, to Jerry's point, virtually everything that Canadian consumers touch at some point is impacted by the rail industry. So you talked about fuel and chemicals earlier in the show, but food, automobiles, commodities, and consumer goods
Mm-hmm.
are all transported via rail. In terms of the immediate impact, one of the areas that will be impacted, from a local perspective, is the Port of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
So the Port of Vancouver will not be able to function and operate without rail service. So it will very quickly have to shut down, or most of its operations will have to shut down quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But automotive plants in Ontario, for example, we talk about just-in-time deliveries, but certainly the automobiles that are produced are shipped out on rail in most cases, and a lot of the parts still come in via rail. So those plants will be shut down as well. And we already previously talked about the agricultural sector.
Yeah. Here in BC, we've had previous railway service disruptions for landslides. There's been COVID supply chain issues. We've had flooding that have made transport incredibly difficult for the supply chain. What, I guess, makes this one particularly different, but also, what can we learn in terms of making sure that supply chain can continue despite these sort of disruptions?
Well, this is the tough balancing act because, the two railways, CN and CP, really do have a monopoly in terms of its market share in Canada. So how do you protect the rights of the workers in terms of allowing them to bargain freely for a contract versus managing what is essentially essential service for the Canadian public? because, there is no plan B for all those industries that we've talked about during the show. The logistical systems, the material management systems, the supply chains, and all of the industries that we discussed are set up to be able to handle raw materials and finished product via rail. And the trucking industry does not have the capacity or the capability to be able to substitute for the lost rail capacity.
Right. I mean, they are obviously going to have to step up. There's no way they can compare and sort of take over those operations. Quickly, before I let you go, Fraser, given that the deadline is tonight, how likely do you think a last-minute deal between these two sides could be and avoid any disruptions?
Well, Amy, I was more optimistic last week than I am right now.
I think many were.
I haven't heard anything positive. CN issued a statement, I think, yesterday saying that they had made, and I'm going to quote here, no meaningful progress.
Yeah.
So certainly the language coming out of both sides of the negotiating table is not very positive. So I think tomorrow, this time, that we'll probably be in the middle of a rail strike, and the conversation that we're discussing today will be very relevant.
I think you could be correct, but we will have to wait and see. Fraser, thanks so much for taking time with us today. Always appreciate
Amy,
it.
it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on BC today.
All right, we'll talk soon. Fraser Johnson, Supply Chain Management Association Chair at the Ivey Business School at Western University. And if you're wondering how the railway stoppage could affect you, we have an explainer for you on our website. It covers impacts on everything from freight to farming, French fries, and more. You can find that on our website, cbcnews.ca, or download the CBC News app. It is 12:27, and this is BC Today. Returning now to a topic we discussed yesterday, and it's about people who are switching back to non-smartphones, back to basics without all the online apps. A technology analyst we spoke to says it's a growing trend. Max called us yesterday on his flip phone, funny enough, and he told us why he made the switch.
The benefits of switching over were immediate. I think, we've all been sitting on the couch at night watching a show maybe with our significant other, and then we find ourselves looking at our phone. All of those sort of behaviors stop instantly, at least for me, without even thinking about it. It wasn't a sort of like trial period of wanting to go back to the smartphone. It just ended.
And you've also been sending us your thoughts by email. Rob said, I developed such bad screen addiction the past few years that I have done the following. Paid money for the Freedom app, which works on my computer and phone. It allows me to create different block lists of apps and websites, different blocking schedules, and also to block after I reach a certain number of hours per day or week. I purchased the TV Timer Bob device for my TV. It plugs into the wall, the TV plugs into the TV Timer Bob, and you can't unplug the TV without a physical key. And then the TV Timer Bob has a master pin setting for schedules and limits up to 6 users. And then each user has their own pin according to their TV schedule. This might be helpful for individuals and parents who are trying to control screen time and need help beyond willpower. And Marian wrote in with a sentiment that many in our audience echoed. She says, I hadn't heard the term dumb phone until a few minutes ago. What a horrible name. These phones are actually the smart ones, giving people back their lives and kicking the addiction habit. Let's come up with a better term. Maybe some of your smart listeners have some ideas. And this is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on the CBC News app. Coming up, we're going to take a look at menopause, and we'll have 2 experts with us to answer your questions and give you some tips and tricks for entering this perhaps new stage of your life. Before that, though, we've got the CBC News with Belle Puri.
Good afternoon. 2 Vancouver police officers have been charged with assault related to an off-duty incident last December. Brian Hunt and Joshua Wong each face 1 count of assault over an offence alleged to have occurred in Vancouver. In 2015, Wong was among several officers involved in a takedown that resulted in the death of 33-year-old Miles Gray. A Chilliwack Middle School is about to double its classroom space by 2026. A.D. Rundle Middle School will get 12 new classrooms to boost its capacity to 750 student seats. The provincial government says it's an $18 million boost for the growing community. And CN Rail, Canadian Pacific Kansas City, and the union, which represents about 9,300 rail workers, have less than 24 hours to reach an agreement before the trains stop. The union says workers are ready to walk off the job at midnight Eastern Time tomorrow. The rail companies say they'll lock out workers at the same time. A work stoppage would hurt Canada's entire community. A look at the BC weather along the north coast. Clear and 18 in the Peace region and central interior, a 60% chance of showers. Some thunder, and of course the local smoke is still there, a high of 21. In the southeast and southern interior, mainly cloudy with a 30% chance of showers, a high of 25. On the south coast, Greater Victoria and Metro Vancouver, showers beginning right about now. We might get some thunder this afternoon, a high of 16 on the island and up to 18 in Metro Vancouver. And that's the CBC News from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Belle. And staying with the news of the day and the big story south of the border, the Democratic National Convention is in full swing in Chicago. And last night, two of the most popular Democrats electrified the crowd.
Hello, Chicago!
Barack and Michelle Obama headlined the second night of the convention. They got enthusiastic reactions from the crowd for slamming the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. And they made the case for Kamala Harris for president.
We are all created equal. All of us endowed with certain inalienable rights, that everyone deserves a chance, that even when we don't agree with each other, we can find a way to live with each other. That's Kamala's vision. That's Tim's vision.
Her story is your story. It's my story. It's the story of the vast majority of Americans trying to build a better life. Look, Kamala knows, like we do, that regardless of where you come from, what you look like, who you love, how you worship, or what's in your bank account, we all deserve the opportunity to build a decent life.
And many Democrats have drawn parallels between the momentum in the Harris campaign and the excitement Barack Obama rode to the White House in 2008. Michelle Obama even channeled that campaign, saying hope is making a comeback, while the crowd chanted, "Yes, she can," a slight change to a slogan Obama made famous. We will have full coverage of that convention for you on cbcnews.ca and the CBC News app. And it can affect half the population, but unlike big life changes such as puberty and pregnancy, menopause remains a bit of a mystery. And so without proper access to information, many who experience menopause are unprepared for the physical and mental changes. If the average Canadian woman will spend up to half her life in a menopausal state, that includes the lead up to it and after it, then why isn't there more open discussion about menopause and even more widespread education? So what do you want to know about menopause? What has your experience been with menopause? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now is Dr. Kelsey Mills, an OBGYN who specializes in menopause and is on the Medical Advisory Board, Menopause Foundation of Canada. Hi, Dr. Mills.
Hi there.
And Dr. Nishi Dhawan, a certified menopause clinician and a founding member of the West Coast Women's Clinic. Good afternoon, Dr. Dhawan.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Thank you both for coming on. I'll get this first question out to both of you, starting with you, Dr. Mills. What are some of the biggest misunderstandings when it comes to menopause?
Thanks for the question. I think when I meet with women in my practice, some of the things that can be frustrating for both the patient and the menopause provider is this idea that there aren't any good treatment options, that there aren't any safe treatment options, and that the symptoms that women are experiencing, coping with, struggling with, just have to be, waited out. And I think that that's a huge misconception. And it's definitely an archaic idea of what we do now in modern menopause management.
And archaic is a word that I have seen come up before in terms of sort of treatment and more importantly, I guess, attitudes towards menopause in our society. Dr. Dawan, what about you? What do you think are some of the biggest, I guess, misunderstandings or misconceptions when it comes to menopause?
Well, I agree with Dr. Mills, and I also see in my practice that women have been told that hormone therapy is bad, to stay away from it. They've got so much misinformation because there's conflicting information from different sources. So they're very confused. And so they don't know who to trust. Sometimes they go to their doctor, they've told one thing, they go to a friend, been told something else. So they're very confused. And they're told that they should only be on hormones if they are going to be for a very little time. So there's a lot of misconception, a lot of fear around menopausal management and what their hormone options are, or other options as well.
And why do you both feel, there's still such a fundamental lack of information and education? I mean, I suppose a very simple answer could be, because it's simply a woman's issue, and so it hasn't gotten as much study. But perhaps there's more nuances. Dr. Mills, I'll have you weigh in first.
I would say the first point I would want to make is that I feel in this current moment, menopause is actually having a moment, and that there is interest and advocacy and education going on. I meet women every day who come to my office and say, I read about this on this excellent social media site, or this excellent patient handout from a validated website. So I have optimism that we are getting somewhere, and certainly groups like the Menopause Foundation of Canada have made massive inroads in order to further advocacy projects in Canada for Canadian women at huge levels. But I think it all stems back really, unfortunately, to the role of women in society, and a lot of the misinformation that, doctors like you have on the line today battle every day. Go back to, challenging interpretations of a study from the 1990s. And we're still sort of battling misinformation. We don't use those same medications. We don't use those same doses. We don't use them in the patients that were studied in that population. And so we're still sort of correcting misconceptions from over 20 years ago.
And those negative connotations are always the hardest to sort of dispel and overcome. Dr. Dawan, how do you, or why do you feel that there, maybe historically has been such a lack of engagement and proper education? And do you feel that is changing, I suppose?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the education is changing, and I think there's actually a lot of information out there. I think where the challenge becomes is the women I see in my practice, like Dr. Kelsey said, that there's a lot of women who are coming, they've read about a lot of things, but they don't know how to make sense of it all because there is conflicting information. And they often are challenged to find people or health practitioners who can interpret the data for them or interpret this information that they can trust. So that's the challenge, how to make sense of the information. I don't think it's a lack of information, but how to make sense of the existing information.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's a huge contributory factor is that, in medical school, we're not taught a lot about menopause. Dr. Mills has done an OBGYN residency, and you're taught a lot about that. But in medical school, as general practitioners,
you are not taught. There's not a huge curriculum based on menopause. And so you have a large cohort of physicians who were educated around that big study that Dr. Mills alluded to, got information, misinformation, misinterpretation, and there was a lot of media hype. So unfortunately, that stigma is still continuing on, and it takes 10 to 15 years to really undo the misinformation or the interpretation of that study and the stigma that occurred around it. But yes, there's optimism. Things are coming full circle, and I believe there's a lot more research that's supporting the safety and efficacy of many hormonal and menopausal treatments, non-hormonal and hormonal. So we have a lot more to choose from in this day and age.
And I see Dr. Mills nodding when you were talking about the lack of education in medical school. And just to be clear, the study from the 90s that you both are referring to, that was talking about the harmful effects of hormone therapy, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We do have
That's
a call.
correct. Yeah.
We do have a call coming in now from Carolyn in Maple Ridge. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello.
And what are you thinking about menopause today?
Just that that experience that is always evolving. I find that just when you think that the symptoms or the problems that come with it have settled down, something new comes. Like, for instance, last night I woke up with really itchy fingers and ankles, which was somewhat concerning in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And I Google it in the morning, and it's, this too is a symptom of menopause. So just the things that you never thought of or have even heard of can be part of menopause, and that it just seems to go on, and there's not a lot of information in a concise manner that you're presented with. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Carolyn. Thanks for sharing that. And it does. It as she says, just when you think you've got a hold on the symptoms that you're having, things shift and change. And you might not have heard about that because, as we've seen in the past, traditionally, some of them are embarrassing. It might be something a woman may not have felt comfortable sharing, and so they don't pass on that knowledge. But as you said, Dr. Mills, menopause is having a moment. We need to get T-shirts with that printed, I think, and perhaps that will help.
I'll wear one.
We should all wear one.
To the clinic, yeah.
How does a woman know that she is entering this stage of her life, though? There are all these sort of myriad of symptoms that you won't necessarily associate with something hormonal or that stage in your life. What are some things that, a woman could keep in mind or keep an eye out for to sort of sense that she's perhaps perimenopausal? Dr. Dowan, I'll go to you first.
Obviously there's, clear markers like your periods are changing or you're getting hot flashes. Those are the common ones. But I often will tell women that, if they're suddenly starting to have more PMS symptoms, suddenly see these night sweats start happening before their period, or they've got unexplained anxiety. That's one that women don't recognize that's suddenly come up. It may be anxiety, or it may be some mental health issues, but not to forget that can be very true for perimenopausal women who are usually not anxious. If they're not anxious and suddenly this is coming up, or palpitations, which is again very frequent but not necessarily associated with perimenopause or menopause. And unless women are getting hot flashes or night sweats, they're not recognizing that these two may be perimenopausal symptoms, and joint pains and joint aches. So those are things that can sometimes happen without recognizing that they can be related to hormonal changes.
Not connecting all those dots to sort of, see the holistic picture. Dr. Mills, what about you? Is there anything, you would sort of remind people to also keep in mind that they, perhaps might be entering that menopausal phase of their life?
Yes, well, I agree with all of those comments from Dr. Dewan. Some of those are symptoms that women say, I never thought joint pain was a thing. And here I am at 52, and it's like a switch. And now I have a lot of, aches, especially in the girdles, et cetera. But we endorsed a validated quick screener called the Menopause Quick 6 for doctors or nurse practitioners to screen patients. And it's 6 questions that hit the majority of perimenopausal challenges, and those are changes in bleeding. Are you having hot flashes or night sweats? Do you have any vaginal dryness or intimacy concerns? Bladder, sleep, and mood. And so those are the sort of top 6 validated things that and I screen patients for that. And sometimes women say to me, last year you asked me about this and I wasn't sure why you were asking. And now I'm back this year and I do have symptom X. So it's clicking. But I think being proactive is important, right? And we should be asking and having the conversations and bringing things up with our patients so that they can be thoughtful and, and even just look to themselves and say, maybe the sleep is something more than what I've just attributed to as stress or a bad mattress. Maybe that's more.
Yes, you come up with a lot of excuses, but sometimes you do have to recognize that there's more going on. We'll take another call, this one from Sloan in Campbell River. Hi, Sloan.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling in today.
No, I appreciate taking my call.
Yeah.
I just had a question, I guess, for the experts. My partner of 20 years is kind of at the end of, I believe, what is the pre-menopausal stage. I'm speaking from a point of a little bit of ignorance here, but as a partner to somebody who's going through that, I was wondering if there may be any resources, any support resources for partners to really just support somebody going through that, and if there's anything that us on the other side of that conversation can help with.
Sloan, thank you so much for calling in and asking that, because I think that is an important part of the equation. It can have an impact on intimate relations and partners who may want to learn more. I'll throw that up to both of you. Are there resources that a partner or a family member could to access to really support somebody so they're not going through this alone? Dr. Dawan, how about I'll go to you first.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to commend you for actually asking that question, Sloan, because
we love a supportive partner.
That's what we want to hear. We actually want to hear partners are interested in what's happening for women.
Absolutely.
And once women are feeling supported, first of all, that's the first big step for them. But as far as resources, again, there's first educating yourself just to understand what might be going on. And there's lots of information on the North American Menopause Society website, patient information for patients and I guess for partners as well. But I haven't actually heard of a support group or something for partners particularly. I don't know if Dr. Mills has, but certainly I think educating yourself first would go a far way to help understand the woman who's your partner.
And Dr. Mills, I assume perhaps there are not support groups, but support for somebody going through this is important. What are some ways somebody can help?
Yeah, I echo Dr. Dewan. I mean, if I could give you a standing ovation for that question and comment, I would, because it's wonderful to hear a partner be invested in their partner's health and be curious about what's going on with hormonal changes. I think, as Dr. Dewan said, I mean, accessing high quality information just to catch you up from a layperson perspective on what the hormonal changes are, what the symptoms are, what women can be experiencing. I'll throw out another website, which is the Canadian Menopause Society. Lots of high quality patient information on there as well. But what I would say is I always welcome patients if they want to bring their partner to a consultation or to an appointment. It's really eye-opening sometimes for the partner to hear what their partner is going through and to hear the conversation of, what is normal, what is not normal, what treatment options are available, what has the person been going through. And so that can often be a great starting place.
We'll take another call from Anne in Enderby. Hello, Anne. Thanks for calling in to BC Today.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, Dr. Mills and Dr. Dallin. I have a very personal question to ask you. I have a nurse practitioner, and I've been on HRT since I was 55. I'm 63 now.
Okay.
My nurse practitioner will not allow me to stay on hormone replacement therapy due to the belief that there's an issue with heart attacks and strokes after 65. I am now starting to experience, here's the money shot, vaginal atrophy. It's very uncomfortable, and I'm very concerned if she's going to take me off of HRT. I actually think my dosage isn't high enough if I'm starting to experience this. I've tried to keep up and read as much as is available to me, but if my medical caregiver isn't keeping up, I'm stuck. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Anne. And I'll ask both of you. How does somebody access care that the person that's supposed to provide it to her is not comfortable doing? I will leave it to you, as she said, the experts to answer her question. Dr. Dewan, what would you say to Anne?
Well, Anne, first of all, I think that's one of the misconceptions that is out there, that there's a time that we have to stop hormone therapy. And I think we've gone away from that in the recent years, and recognizing that each individual woman is unique. Her risk factors are unique, her medical history is unique, and her needs are unique. So I think it's very important in looking at hormone therapy to use shared decision-making, and that's between the patient and the healthcare practitioner, and to really understand what are the risks and benefits in that particular woman. We don't have any set stop date. We don't have to stop after 5 years or after 10 years or at the age of 65. It's all about understanding the person in front of you, the patient in front of you, and what is going to be the benefits for her stopping hormone therapy or continuing on, and looking at her risk factors. So, if someone has very minimal cardiovascular risk and is on low dose transdermal hormones, but yet has a higher risk for osteoporosis or other quality of life issues, then the balance may be in her favor to continue. Or if she's tried to stop and you've tried to stop, or you're having low estrogen symptoms at the current time, that's a dialogue needing to happen. And certainly for the vaginal dryness, local vaginal estrogens are safe and are not considered systemic. So those can be continued indefinitely if needed, and doesn't have to be stopped at age 65. But the systemic hormone therapy really requires a dialogue. And I think if that isn't happening with the current health practitioner, that may be just a limitation of that person's practice, and you may need to seek out additional help or consultation with a health menopause practitioner who can have a shared decision making with you.
Dr. Mills, as a OBGYN, do you sometimes see people coming to your practice that have come up against some difficulties with maybe their GP or a nurse practitioner that just aren't able to provide them that proper support medically or even emotionally as they're going through menopause?
I do. And this happens frequently, but as Dr. Dewan sort of alluded to earlier, this isn't the fault of any individual practitioner. This is a limitation of their medical or nursing education that they received. So I appreciate, I know a lot about a very small area, and when you're a family physician or a nurse practitioner, you have to know a little about everything. And so I appreciate that sometimes there's a role to, send somebody along to a menopause expert, or even, a general OBGYN. Now, I think our knowledge levels are quite good. There are many endocrinologists who will also help with this, and many sort of women's health providers who are family physicians by training. But I think the important thing for patients to hear specific to this question is that I absolutely agree. All current national and international guidelines state that there is no maximum length of use for systemic hormones. And that's a really important point to get across. And the other thing I would say to your listeners is that if you're having a challenge finding somebody who can help with your symptoms, the Menopause Society, formerly the North American Menopause Society, has a list of all current certified practitioners, of which Dr. Dewan and I have that certification. So there are many of us in Canada. And so perhaps that's a way to seek out help. And I've certainly had patients come to my office, and that's how they've found me.
All right, and I hope that you can find satisfactory treatment for you. Time for one last quick call. We'll head to Maggie in Kamloops. Hi, Maggie. We've got time for a quick question. Maggie, are you there? Oh, looks like we've lost Maggie. I will go to you guys with one quick question. What are some of the health risks that women are at risk for as they're going through menopause? Just things that they should be aware of, and I guess how they can maybe take preventative action to mitigate any of those risks. Dr. Dawam, let's go with you first.
Well, I think there's a lot of research saying that our bodies are changing, not just in menopause, but, there's a recent study that came out that mid 40s and at age 60, there's huge shifts in the aging of our bodies and the molecules and the microbes that contribute to that shift. And so what we see is, we see insulin resistance, we see changes in cortisol, we see lipid changes and also changes in our own metabolism. So I think that's what's really important, and I often counsel my women, is that if you are taking a proactive approach, you can actually mitigate a lot of the negative aging consequences that start to happen. So if we're looking at changing our diet, cleaning up our diet, exercising, often I tell women, if you exercise and eat the same, you often will gain weight because you have to account for the shift that's happening in your body around midlife, around menopause and perimenopause and beyond. So I think, taking a proactive approach, watching your stress, that's a big one. Women underestimate the amount that stress has a profound impact on the hormonal symphony, on how our ovaries function, the whole hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and ovarian axis. Our brain communicates with our adrenals and our ovaries on a daily basis and tells us what to do. And so that will impact how our hormones are regulated. It's a hormone symphony.
Okay.
So really keeping stress under control, lifestyle is key. And I think the other big thing I always talk about for women is looking at alcohol, because we know that alcohol metabolism changes at age 40 or 45.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Dawam. We are right out of time, but I want to thank you both for joining us today.